Hey, my name's Karim. I'm the CTO and CISO at Fan.ai, and we're a big data analytics company. We're in the sports sponsorship space, and our unique selling proposition is that we measure real world outcomes from sports sponsorships. And I'll explain what that means in a minute. Before I start, however, I want to let you know that this talk will only be partially technical and partially on the business side of running a big data analytics company. So if you're looking for a purely technical talk, you may want to skip more towards the end. My feelings won't be hurt. But this is what we're covering today. I'm going to give you an intro to Fan.ai and sponsorship attribution. I'm going to talk about what are our goals with sponsorship attribution. I'm going to go into how we collect, enrich, segment data as a big data analytics company. And talk about how we formulate control groups, how we measure statistical confidence, and then we're going to wrap up by just showing you the final product of this analysis. Okay, so now that you're committed, how delicious are McDonald's French fries? Pretty good, right? Well, McDonald's is possibly the world's most recognized brand, and they spend something like $60 million every year sponsoring sports teams. Something like 100 sponsorships per year nets out to around $500,000 per sponsorship. But that includes everything from collegiate athletics to professional teams to entire leagues. So as you can imagine, they may only spend $100,000 or less sponsoring a collegiate team like the UCLA men's basketball team, but they may spend millions of dollars sponsoring an NBA team like the world champion LA Lakers, or they may spend tens of millions of dollars sponsoring the Olympics. And the global market here, we're talking about $89 billion. It's a pretty big market that we're trying to get a piece of. This is a photo here of Citi Field, which is home of the New York Mets. It's one of the most heavily sponsored stadiums and teams in the world, as you can see by all the signage and advertisements they have there behind center field. But sponsorships are a black box for the most part. A company like Taco Bell, for example, may spend millions of dollars to sponsor the Los Angeles Chargers, but they may have literally no idea if that money was well spent. In other words, what was the impact of that sponsorship? Did it result in an increase of LTV for Taco Bell for each Chargers fan? Did it increase sales at Taco Bell stores? Did it increase the number of customers they have coming in and transactions that they're making? And did Taco Bell gain mind share from these fans? And we'll get into exactly what we mean by mind share. It's also known as brand affinity in the marketing world in a little bit. But before that, let's briefly touch on maybe the most important concept here, which is really core to what we're doing, and that's attribution. So in marketing, attribution, also known as multi-touch attribution, is the identification of a set of brand exposures that contribute in some manner to a desired outcome, and then assignment of a value to each of these events. So it's attributing some events or some outcomes that happen, usually sales, maybe online, maybe in store, to some marketing campaigns, maybe an Instagram ad, maybe a billboard, maybe even a sponsorship campaign. Now, attribution is pretty much a solved problem when it comes to online attribution and online marketing funnels. If you're Adidas and you're advertising this sweatshirt here, and somebody, say, clicks on your Facebook ad for this sweatshirt and then visits your website and makes a purchase, well, it's pretty easy to track where that purchase originated from, right? Assuming you've set up your Google Analytics pipeline properly, like this, or whatever analytics you use. But offline attribution, on the other hand, is much more difficult. If you're, say, Burger King, and a customer sees an ad on a billboard or at the stadium, or they hear an ad on the radio, or they see an ad on television, how can you attribute that to a purchase made online? Or even more difficult, how can you attribute that to a purchase made at the store? That's what we do at my company, Fan.ai, and I'm going to explain how in the coming slides. And the reason we do it is so that marketers can better allocate, optimize, and measure their spend across all of their marketing channels, not just the online ones. So first, we've thrown around this term real-world outcomes. What exactly do we mean by real-world outcomes? Well, firstly, as a brand, I want to be more top of mind to the fans of the team that I'm sponsoring, right? We call this brand affinity. In the industry, it's also known as mindshare. And it's one of the unique things that we do to measure the outcomes of sponsorships. But how do we measure that? Well, one data-driven way is to measure the increase in followers that a brand gets during a sponsorship period, right? But is that enough? A better way, in our opinion, is to measure the increase in shared followers between a team and a brand and how that changes over time. Now, why is that better? Well, because it means that there are more fans who like the team already, who now like the brand. It's a better indicator that the sponsorship itself, or the exposure itself, is what's responsible for the increase in followership and not some other extraneous factor. So in this example here, we're measuring the Twitter follower overlap between Coca-Cola and Team Solo Mid, which is one of the most popular esports teams in the world in League of Legends. And as you can see, there's a 3.7% overlap here between the followership, which corresponds to roughly 200,000 people who follow both Coca-Cola and TSM. And FYI, this data, along with all the data that I'm showing you in this presentation, is sample data. But a 3.7% brand affinity here would be pretty high. It means that Team Solo Mid has a high brand affinity with Coca-Cola. Secondly, and more magically, spend uplift is a real-world outcome that we can measure. We also call this assisted sales or assisted revenue. You can think of it also as return on investment. And here, the ideal way to measure it is to look at the percentage change in spend for fans of a sponsored team, also known as the exposed group, versus a control group. And we'll get into control group methodology in a minute. But here's an example of how we'd show spend uplift in our platform. So here, the brand is McDonald's. The team or property is the New York Mets. And you can see over this time period, which is a year, there was a 14% sales lift, which is really good. If this was a marketing campaign or a sponsorship campaign and McDonald's saw a 14% sales lift by sponsoring the New York Mets, they'd probably want to keep up that sponsorship. I'll give you a full product walkthrough later, but I just wanted to give you a little tease of what the final product looks like. So, hypothetically, if McDonald's sponsors the New York Mets, they might spend something like $5 million on that sponsorship. It might last for the course of a season. And in exchange, they may get some signage behind center field, and they might show some advertisements on television. And based on that, some audiences that we know have been exposed here are one, season ticket holders who attended the Mets games, fans, other fans who with mobile devices who are at the stadium, and also fans who are watching at home on their smart TVs or streaming on their computer or what have you. And this is kind of how it all fits together. This is the 30,000 foot view of how our process works. First, we get fan data in from the team, from the Mets. So that could be ticketing data about season ticket holders or anybody who attended the game. It could be data from merchandise sales. It could be data from who subscribed to their newsletter. We also get location data in from a data provider called Reveal Mobile. They give us device IDs of people who were at the stadium. And we get TV data in from Kinetic. So all that data goes into the Fan.ai platform. We get customer purchase data on who on how people are spending at McDonald's from Fiserv and some other partners. And we crunch all that data and we spit out these real business outcomes to McDonald's, things like assisted revenue lift, assisted transaction lift, mindshare lift, and demographic data. And then I included in here some other of our data partners that we work with. This is by no means all of them. We work with a bunch of partners who help us match data and enrich data, but these are some of the more important ones. And this is how it works in greater detail. Here I'm highlighting some of the roles that my teams play at Fan.ai. I have a back-end team, a front-end team, and a data science team. And they all work together to build our platform and do meaningful analysis there. So the first step is that McDonald's signs into our platform and says, I want to track the Mets, or I'm sponsoring the Mets. And then from there, our data team will do some manual work right now to gather audiences, as we call them. So they're going to go out to Reveal Mobile and they're going to get location data about who was at the Mets stadium. They're going to go out to Kinetic and they're going to get TV data about who was watching the Mets games on television. They may segment that data further demographically or psychographically, and then pass that personal info on to a matching partner like Experian or maybe LiveRamp. Experian is going to match that personal information to spend IDs or enrichment IDs and pass it on to a transaction data provider like Fiserv. Fiserv is then typically going to return to Fan.ai an anonymized aggregated report. We will take that, we will massage it, we will prettify it, put it in our platform, put it in reports, and then spit it back to McDonald's to view in the platform or just to view manually as reports. But you might be asking yourself, after looking at that, why is it so complex? Why is there Experian in there? Why do we have this three-party matching model? And the reason is for data privacy. So using this sort of model ensures that no one party has a complete view of the customer. In other words, no one party can correlate the consumer's private information to their spending habits. So we utilize these matching partners like Experian and LiveRamp. And this is how it works. First, Fan.ai sends PII along with an enrichment ID for each piece of PII to the matching partner, Experian and LiveRamp. The matching partner matches that PII with a private ID or spend ID, and then passes it along to the enrichment partner or transaction data provider. Could be Fiserv, could be Visa. And then those financial data providers are going to calculate the spend for each one of those enrichment IDs, for each one of those private IDs. And then they send the data back along with the enrichment ID so that we can then go and match that back up with the person. And in this way, Fan.ai never knows about the mapping of PII to credit card. The matching partner never knows about the spend data, and the enrichment partner never knows about the PII. Now, of course, if the enrichment partner is Visa, they have PII on you. They have your email, your social security number, your address, etc. So they already know a lot about you. But we work with other financial partners besides Visa. Okay, so moving on, I want to highlight some of our main data sources and how we collect data from them. Firstly, we collect PII from rights holders. Rights holders could be a player, team, league, and we call these first-party records, the data that we collect from them. It's typically PII like email, name, address, phone number, and just in case anyone doesn't know, PII stands for Personally Identifiable Information. It's information that can be tied only to you. It's the most sensitive type of information that we have to safeguard with our lives as data practitioners here. So for information security and data privacy, we store this PII that we get in Google storage buckets. We're in Google Cloud Platform, hereafter referred to as GCP, and we put it in segregated buckets per client, and we lock those buckets down. There's only a couple people in our company who have access to these buckets and to this PII. Next is Twitter. We subscribe to the Twitter Firehose, and Firehose is a bit of a misnomer because it's not actually streaming data like a hose would be streaming water. It's just a lot of data, but the primary piece that we pay for is the follower graph, and that gives us access to followers, friends, and users. And it enables us to download the followers of roughly 20,000 Twitter entities on a weekly basis, and we use that to build up audiences about who is following different influencers, athletes, teams, and so forth. We built up this ETL in GCP. We use Google Kubernetes Engine, hereafter referred to as GKE, for most of our infrastructure. We also use PubSub for queuing, as there's a lot of data here and we don't want to lose any. And then we load all the data into BigQuery at the end. Next is Twitch. Similar to Twitter, we use Twitch to build up audiences of people who watch influencers, mostly in the esports space. We can also use it to build up audiences of people who are watching esports tournaments and esports events. The Twitch API is free, and it enables us to, most importantly, download the viewers of the top streams. So we download the viewers of the top 5,000 streams every 3 minutes. So it's a high volume ETL we have here. Built it in GKE. We do use some cloud functions that are scheduled with the cloud scheduler. Of course, we use PubSub and BigQuery again. On the TV side, we predominantly use Kinetic, which is known as the world's largest unified TV intelligence network. We use Kinetic to build up audiences, of course, with people who watched live sporting events on television. They have a reach of around 15 million devices or households. We also looked at TiVo, which if I remember correctly, TiVo was only around 4 million, so we get a much greater reach with Kinetic. And they deliver their results to an AWS S3 bucket. And since we're in GCP, we have to go out and fetch that from AWS, and then we load it into BigQuery to do analysis. Reveal Mobile is the location data provider that we've settled on. They have data from over 12 million US locations, and the data is about the mobile devices that have been there. And so we use that along with the TV data to build up audiences of people who were exposed to a sponsorship at a sporting event at a particular venue, like a stadium or coliseum. Further down the road, we could even figure out who went to the event and then went to the store and bought something. Technically, Reveal Mobile is pretty easy to work with. They deliver data to a Google storage bucket for us, which is nice. And similarly, they push CCPA and GDPR opt-outs to a similar bucket. Technology is similar here. We utilize a Google function that gets triggered off the addition to one of those storage buckets, and then it goes and does its job, typically loading data into BigQuery. All right. I also want to touch a little bit on demographic segmentation. Full contact is what we predominantly use to enrich and then subsequently segment audiences demographically. The best thing about full contact is that it's API driven. So we send them an API request, and then that API request contains an email or a phone number, maybe even a Twitter handle, and we say that we want to subscribe to this person. And then typically seconds to minutes later, they respond to our webhook with the demographic information that we requested that represents that person. So similar to the rest, GKE, PubSub, BigQuery gets the job done. And this is a sample of the type of audience breakdown we do. So we can break down by age and gender of a fan base. We can break it down by location, city, state, region, so forth. And then not shown here, but we can also break down by things like education, socioeconomic status, income, what have you. Full contact is really vast in all the information they give. We don't even subscribe to it all. All right. We're not going to get too crazy, but I do want to talk a little bit about control groups. So when we talk about spend uplift, we say that we want to calculate the spend uplift compared to a control group. And the perfect control group is what we call a one-to-one control group. And in this ideal control group, you match each person in the exposed group to somebody not in the exposed group, but having similar characteristics. So in our Mets example, if the exposed group is people who attended Mets home games at the Mets Stadium, we should probably try to find people who live in New York and who share as many common characteristics and interests of the folks who actually attended the Mets games. But of course, we want people who did not actually attend the Mets games. So we work with our spend data providers like Fiserv to automate the creation of control groups. After all, the spend data providers have all the juicy information. They know what people are spending on. So by nature, they know what they're interested in. They know where they are because they have your address. They have your date of birth, so they know how old you are. And they also have other super sensitive information like your social security number. So they can use that to identify you and get all kinds of demographic info on you. But to be specific about how to create a control group, we want to find the most similar person that's not in the exposed group based on demographics and or spending habits. And when we're looking at spending habits, we definitely want to take into consideration how they spend in many different categories, potentially hundreds or thousands. And we don't want to take into consideration how they spend in the spend category in question. So if we're working with McDonald's, we don't want to take into consideration how they're spending in the QSR or a quick serve restaurant group, because we want to see a change in spend in that category. And here's some notes on techniques that you can utilize in this process. I'm not going to go too much into this methodology, but there's potentially a lot of spend categories, hundreds or thousands. We should try to reduce that down to the most important dimensions and infer what those dimensions are. We try to get it down to around 30, and then we could use an algorithm like the closest distance in multidimensional space to find the most similar person for each person in the exposed group. If you have questions about this, feel free to contact me later and we can talk about it. But it begs the question, do we really need this perfect one-to-one control group? I mean, after all, creating a control group is computationally heavy, it's expensive resource-wise. Can we show spend uplift by simply proving that the New York audience, the New York Mets audience, is spending more than similar audiences in New York, like the Yankees, Giants, Knicks, Nets? One con I can think of is that there's definitely some overlaps in these audiences with the New York Mets audience, right? Surely some fans of the New York Mets are fans of the New York Yankees. Maybe. I don't know how heated that rivalry is, but there's no way we could make a true one-to-one control group there, so it wouldn't be ideal. But directionally, we could still show spend uplift without a true one-to-one control group, and we experiment with that as well. All right. One of the important things that our clients ask us when we present analysis is, how confident are you in these numbers that you're showing us? How confident are you in this spend uplift? And we can show that mathematically. So we want to be able to say with confidence that their sponsorship was truly effective or not effective. Regardless if it was effective or not effective, we want to be able to tell them with confidence. We don't want to say that there was luck involved, there was random sampling variation, right? So we built in a confidence score into our analysis. In this case here, we're 85% confident that these McDonald's sponsorships in their portfolio improve sales by 3.2% here. And we're 85% confident that transactions increased by 2.5%. But how do we calculate that? So here's the math. You're probably familiar with this from your statistics classes, so I won't go too far into it, but we use the t-test here to compare the mean spends of the exposed and the control group. The higher the value of t, the higher the statistical confidence, and the more we can trust spend uplift. Most importantly, in this formula, x is the mean spend of the exposed and control. And to be complete, just so we're all on the same page, we calculate spend uplift percentage by taking the mean spend of the exposed group minus the mean spend of the control group divided by the mean spend of the control group, and then we multiply it by 100 in order to get the percent. And we use Python. We use a library called scipy.stats to do a lot of stuff, including the statistical confidence. But let's look at the formula and use our math skills. Now, if we want to get a high confidence, we should have a big difference between the mean spends, right? Or if we want to have a high confidence, we could increase the sample size n, right? Or if we want to have a high confidence, we could decrease the standard deviations, right? If there's less standard deviation, if there's less variation, it means that audience members in the same group are spending similarly, so we can be more confident of the lift that we see there. So what is an acceptable confidence level? Traditionally in statistics, it's 95%, but it depends on the context, right? If we look at an example like, let's take COVID vaccines. If we got a COVID vaccine that was, 75% effective, we'd probably take it, right? As long as it didn't kill us 5% of the time. From our context and talking with brands, we feel good about an 85% confidence. We feel really good about a 95% confidence. So with a 95% confidence, if we assume a standard deviation of 1/3 the sample size, here are some minimum spend uplifts that we'd need to ensure a 95% confidence level. So with a paltry sample size of only 500, we'd need a big spend uplift of over 5.5% to be 95% confident. Whereas all the way down at the other end, if we had a healthy sample size of 500,000 fans, we'd only need to see a 0.176% spend uplift in order to be 95% confident. So you can kind of see how the levers play there. Okay, we got the math out of the way. The last thing I'm going to touch on before showing the final analysis is data privacy. And I know this is a bit boring, so I'm only going to have one slide on it, I promise. Under GDPR, Fan.ai is a data processor, and under CCPA, Fan.ai is considered a service provider. And this is because we don't actually collect data from individuals or consumers. And as such, our obligations are far less stringent than those businesses who are actually collecting data from consumers in California or from citizens of the EU. But most importantly, we must, one, delete or forget data upon request. And two, we must notify data controllers or businesses who collect data of any breach to our system. And we have protocols and processes in place to do these things within 30 days of receiving a request, which generally falls within the law. If anybody's curious about our protocols or processes there, I'm happy to share. Just follow up with me after the talk and we'll be happy. Okay, we made it to the end. From here on out, I'm just going to show you some screenshots of our platform and how we pull it all together to show meaningful analysis to our clients. So let's start with the sponsorship portfolio here. This is for McDonald's. This is a high-level view of all of their sponsorships combined. And at the top here, we have some important numbers. McDonald's is tracking 50 properties. And of those 50 properties, we were able to match almost 40 million fans. Of those 40 million fans, we were able to match 8.2 million as McDonald's customers. And we have a blended confidence score for all the data on this page of 98%. The most important numbers are the ones in green. If we start over here on the left, we can see that assisted revenue was up 3.2% because of these sponsorships. In absolute value is $59.1 million. And the assisted transactions were up 2.5%. In absolute value, that's 4.8 million transactions. So McDonald's sponsorships are doing well. Now, down below here, we have some benchmarking. So McDonald's can see how different properties are performing and how even like if they're sponsoring entire leagues, how they perform against each other. We also think it's important to look at how sponsorships perform over time. So we can look at things like assisted sales lift, assisted transactions, and customers over time and how they're hopefully increasing. And one of the things that we're overlaying here are what's called activations. And in marketing speak, an activation is like an advertising campaign, or it could be a sponsorship campaign that lasts a certain period of time. One example here, which is a real example that the McDonald's had with the Mets is they called it the discount double play. And I believe how it worked was every time the Mets made a double play at Citi Field, then they could go to a local McDonald's and get 2 for 1 on Big Macs. Yum, yum. All right. So we also break down spend attribution by channel. So we can look at how different channels of audiences compared, TV versus on-site versus social versus digital versus radio. And then we also break it down by region. So you can see which sponsorship campaigns are working best in different regions. We can also break down by consumer recency. So being able to tell McDonald's how many customers are coming back and spending as a result of the sponsorship, and versus how many customers are new. This gives McDonald's a sense of like how many times they need to expose fans to their campaigns in order for them to be effective. And we can break out spend lift by day of week as well. So if McDonald's is running activations on certain days of the week, they can easily see the effect of those campaigns. Similarly, we can break out by time of day. And finally, we can also break out by where the purchase is taking place, offline versus offline, online versus offline. This may be more important to McDonald's nowadays, as I would imagine more people are ordering McDonald's online than they used to. So, in summary, spend attribution is difficult, but we solved it by gathering data from rights holders, gathering data from TV audiences, gathering data from locations, segmenting it, and then matching it with transaction data providers who then enrich it for us and then give us anonymized and aggregated data, which we present back to brands. So that's it in a nutshell. Feel free to ask me any questions here. And if we run out of time, feel free to message me via email or Twitter. Thanks.